Every revolution starts in the minds of the people. Arm yourself for the war of ideas. Take back your life. Take back your liberty. Tom Mullen Talks Freedom.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tom Mullen Talks Freedom. Today is Thursday, February 5th. I think this will be episode 216 of the Tom Mullen Talks Freedom podcast. And broadcasting today from Ground Zero. Well, maybe it's not Ground Zero. I am a little out of the way here in southeastern Niagara County, New York. But at least in the whirlwind of what I'm calling mass Epsteria, just a torrent of information and takes and basically hysteria over the latest round of the Epstein files. And I have so many things to say about this that I kind of don't know where to begin. I made myself an outline. Now it doesn't seem right. So I'm going to wing it, and I'll tell you what I think. And I guess I'll go back to the beginning. And I'm talking back during the first Trump administration. I just remember the 4,000 sealed indictments. Does anyone else remember that? So as Trump was going around, breaking most of his promises the first time around, trying to lay it off on the Russia hoax, which was a hoax, and was, of course, the Democratic Party trying to undermine, well, I should say the deep state, together with the Democratic Party, if there is a division line there, trying to undermine the Trump presidency. But of course, that had nothing to do with him signing the huge spending bills, promising to never do it again, and then signing this huge spending bill again, and going after Thomas Massie for not supporting them. This is all in the first term. The whole third-rate grandstander nickname for Thomas Massie, that came about because he opposed the COVID spending. That's how long ago that was. And, so he and his supporters have used this, very sinister conspiracy. And I know that most people are conditioned to hear that word and think, well, that means it isn't true. No, people conspire all the time. And the FBI and members of the intelligence community and somewhat the FISA courts and a whole bunch of other players conspired to try to unseat, if they could, or at least cripple the presidency of Donald Trump's first term. But that's not why he bombed Syria. Okay, that was his decision. So I don't want to get too far afield from the Epstein thing, but I mean, people will just take a narrative and run so far with it. And that does relate to this. So back in 2008, Jeffrey Epstein, who was involved in some kind of finance, and that part really is very murky. And nobody can really say what exactly in finance he did. He certainly was no Warren Buffett or who's the Lebanese guy, Mr. Wonderful, I forgot his name. No genius investor or anything like that. As far as we could tell, on a large scale, he had like a few clients, and he was definitely mixed up somehow in intelligence. Now, whether that was just him being a wannabe like he was with all these other rich and famous people, whether he was, I don't know, some kind of an asset rather than like an agent or anything like that. Who knows? But there's definitely some connection in those emails. And he also liked young girls, too young. And in 2008, here's what he pled guilty to. So everyone, we can just ground this in some facts. Soliciting prostitution. Okay. That's one of the counts he pled guilty to, and then soliciting prostitution involving a minor under 18. And it's very important to understand exactly what the charges were, because this is a rather mundane charge. Both of them, I mean, we could view the ones involving minors as more despicable. And of course they would be. And, as libertarians, we wouldn't even consider the first part a crime. And then the second part would be all a matter of, is this a person who can't really consent to what they're doing because they're just too young and aren't mature enough? So that's the basis for most age of consent laws. And, of course, there is some point if you go backwards on the aging process and as you get younger and younger, so to speak, where you are not really capable of consenting, that, even though if you're a willing participant in something, especially sexual in nature, that you really are being victimized because you don't have the tools, the maturity, the life experience, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to really know what you're doing and what the consequences to yourself might be. So, like, the consent laws, the age of consent laws, of course, I agree with in principle. Nobody can really agree on what that age is. And there's probably a good argument to say, well, every individual arrives at that moment of maturity at a different age. One person could be 15 and another might not make it till they're 29. Who knows? Or older. Some people might never get there. And so, when you have governments, with a heavy hammer, they just pick a number. And that may or may not reflect what the general community thinks. I think most people would be surprised to know that in most U.S. states, the age of consent is not 18, it's 16, which makes some of the things Jeffrey Epstein did perfectly legal if he were in one of those states rather than in the U.S. Virgin Islands, where it was 18 under U.S. law. And I'm sorry, I did look that up. It's actually the Virgin Islands have their own law, and then the federal standard is 18, but it defers to the local states. So it's very complicated. I always assumed in New York, deep blue, progressive, even married women are being oppressed New York. It was 18, but it turns out it's 17 here. So who knew? Who thinks about these things until something like this becomes a news story? So he was convicted of those things. He pled guilty to those things in 2008. He didn't plead guilty to running any kind of a business to sell underage girls to their services to other people, to clients, resulting in a client list. Okay. He never was charged with that. The feds had a theory that he might, be up to that, or were trying to drum up, charges along those lines in that whole kind of RICO ballpark. And, it's unclear to me whether they really suspected that he was doing any of this or just wanted to put him away for longer because they thought he was so reprehensible. So in any case, obviously he did not learn his lesson from the initial convictions, and he got off with a light sentence for whatever reasons. Corruption involved, probably, because like I said, he was knee deep he had a lot of powerful friends. He had a lot of powerful people who might not want to see his behavior kind of rub off on them, get painted with the same brush, whatever. And as time went on, the whole idea of the Lolita Express, his airplane going to his island where some of this criminal activity occurred, and also to his apartment in New York. And it's funny because a girl that, was 17, it would be legal for him to have sex with in New York, but not in the Virgin Islands. So, some of the details don't really matter here. I mean, I think everyone thinks that a guy his age, even with a 19-year-old girl, is kind of a, dirty old man, or whatever you want to call it, distasteful. But as far as the legality goes, I think it gets pretty complicated. But and there's certainly no Epsteria hysteria about, frowning, finding reprehensible, being disgusted by anything he was convicted of or anything he was suspected of and charged with afterwards. Because you remember, after this conviction, he's again charged in the 2000 teens. I believe he was arrested during the Trump first term, and I could be wrong about that. I don't think it was during Obama's term. He was definitely in custody and died during Trump's first term. So I'm pretty sure he was arrested during Trump's first term. And then, of course, all of this attention towards what he was up to started to kind of grow exponentially and involved all these other people. And the reason I actually made the reference to the first Trump term was because there was this 4,000 sealed indictments thing, and there was Pizzagate, and there was this whole idea of like all of the elites are pedophiles. And what they were exactly up to ranged depending on your reason for investment. So you have this whole kind of very Christian group, and this isn't all Christians, but this is just a group of Christians who believe literally that they're fighting the devil. Literally, they're a supernatural guy who's influencing what happens, on earth, and including in American politics and including with all these elites. And they have that whole perspective on this. And they think that they're part of fighting, somebody's fighting a holy war. Some of them believe Trump is on the side of God against the devil and all this stuff. Okay. So there's that reason that they're so invested in this. And they truly believe that these people are demonic. And then, there's just all the Democrats who believe that whoever else might be guilty of participating with Jeffrey Epstein in criminal activities with minors, Trump was definitely one of them. And this is a way for them to take down Trump. So that's why all the Democrats are invested in it. And all the Republicans are invested in it because they think that the globalists, kind of the same, there's a lot of overlap here between them and the Christians. I mean, some of them are both, right? But even if it's not so much from this demonic perspective, they believe that, these globalist elites are completely corrupt, amoral, and, are abusing children all the time. So everybody thinks this is their ticket to some kind of different political system or landscape or reality. And I guess to me, that's what I'm reading from libertarians being this invested in this. And I think, first of all, the idea is half-baked. I don't think anybody has like this first we'll get the pedophiles and then this will happen and this will happen. But I think libertarians in particular are always looking for a reason that we have the political reality, that we have the enormous government, that we have the atrocious protection of property rights, including liberty, that we have, other than what I consider the real reason, because we have the government most people want. Now, I'm not saying every election is perfectly squeaky clean, and I'm not saying that, everybody votes for everything the politicians end up doing, but generally they want the governments that we have. And you can tell this because nobody runs saying we're going to get rid of Social Security or even cut it by like 2%. Nobody. It's suicide. That ends your political career. Nobody runs on, we're going to pull all our troops out of Japan, Germany, Korea, the whole thing. We're getting rid of it. We're not doing this anymore. It doesn't benefit anybody. Now, you might think Trump talked like that, but he didn't. He never talked about bringing a single troop home. All he talked about was no longer being involved in the forever wars. I mean, very qualified peace candidate, okay? You can be in wars, they just can't be forever wars. And, Tulsi Gabbard, well, we shouldn't be in regime change wars, but we can fight the terrorists. So nobody runs on a principled platform. I mean, Ron Paul did, of course, right? And he got slaughtered in the election. He lost. The best showing he made was losing the Republican primary 48 million votes to 2 million in 2012. And I don't blame Ron Paul for a bit of that. He ran a masterful campaign. He presented the issues better than they've probably ever been presented before, better than even people like Jefferson and Madison presented them. The platform, I mean, the libertarian principles. I blame the people, okay? It's their fault. They have the government they have. They could have elected Ron Paul. They could have nominated him, the Republicans. They could have elected him president. We would not have fought the last 7 wars we were in. We wouldn't have been bombing other countries. We probably wouldn't have such a huge refugee problem because we wouldn't be making so many refugees. You know, we could have had all that. All right. We chose not, I don't know what I'm saying. I voted for him. So you out there who aren't the other 47 people who voted for Ron Paul with me. But, you know, that's the reality. And my criticism of libertarians is never the libertarian principles. It's never their knowledge. It's never their, ability to present our positions. But my one criticism is this self-delusion that if they could just, get that information out, if we could just get a fair hearing, that, suddenly people would go back to 1888 when we had the best president in our history and still had a somewhat limited government, spending about 3% of GDP rather than 35. That's not going to happen, right? And here's the thing. They did hear the principles. No, Ron Paul was not blacked out his second campaign. Yes, he was in 2008 to a large extent. But in 2012, he got way more media than he probably deserved based on the number of votes he was going to get. So everybody got a good hearing. Jay Leno did a very honorable thing and putting him on his huge platform, even though Jay Leno is likely a liberal Democrat, and said, look, they're not treating you fairly. I want people to hear what you have to say, and was very respectful of him. It wasn't that people didn't hear it or being it's the same thing with jury nullification. They're being misled by the judges. No, that's not the problem. Everybody knows there's no consequences for a not guilty verdict. Okay. It doesn't matter what the judge says. Okay. But I don't want to get into that right now. Anyway, where I'm going with all this is this Epstein thing, to me, psychologically, for libertarians. And again, I don't think this is, systematically thought out like most of the rest of the things they think about is somehow prosecuting these people is going to result in a more libertarian country. It's not if you got dozens of them, okay? It would not change a thing politically. And that's why I've never cared about it that much. I mean, I care about it to the extent that if he abused underage girls, that he should be prosecuted. And he was prosecuted twice. And the second time, he apparently killed himself. That whole thing, who knows? I have a theory about the whole Dan Bongino thing. I'll tell you at the end. But I want to get through some of these points. And so I guess what I'm saying is all these different people are heavily invested in the theory that not only did Epstein abuse underage girls, but that he trafficked them to Bill Gates and Prince Andrew and the lawyer who I think won maybe a lawsuit or got somebody to back down based on defaming him. What's his name? The liberal lawyers all over the place now. See, when you get a little older, you start to get forgetful. So, and lots of others, right? Trump for the Democrats, they're like, hey, he was good friends with Epstein. He probably was in on it. Elon Musk. So all these different groups of people are heavily invested. That's true. And no matter how much evidence comes out that lacks any corroboration of that, no matter how many millions of emails are released and none of them corroborate any of the accuser's stories, it doesn't matter. There'll never be enough. Okay. So, I mean, out of the emails that were just released, of course, people are still combing through them. There's millions of them. But people went looking for, the lowest hanging fruit. And basically, there's nothing there. There's all the accusers that we knew about. Okay. And some of them, on their faces, the story is just bogus on its face. Okay. Ridiculous. Nobody would believe it. Even if you believe that not only was Epstein guilty, but lots of other people who flew on his airplane or went to his island. But, one of the big ones that came out was a guy named Stephen Tisch. Look, we have Epstein hooking him up with a girl. Yes, we did. Although I wouldn't use the word girl because she was 26. And it's just interesting to me. That's so far what's put forward. The only reference to Epstein, and this sounded like, it was a woman who Epstein knew, and maybe this Tisch gentleman met her in Epstein's presence or company or through Epstein, and they were talking about her. And she was 26 years old. So again, I'm not saying that either one of those people never did anything wrong. All I'm saying is, if this is the example you're putting forth, why? Where's the email about him hooking up with, a 16-year-old or a 14-year-old? One answer could be, well, they would avoid putting that in writing. Okay, fine. But we've got no evidence is no evidence. And God, I hate to defend a federal prosecutor from any party in any administration, but they had one of them on, one of the Department of Justice attorneys, and the reporters trying to grill him, saying, well, we have, so-and-so on his airplane, and we have him at the island and visiting him in New York. And the lawyer said, yeah, if I had something to prosecute, I would do it. But the problem is, flying on Epstein's airplane's not against the law. Neither is visiting him on his island, and neither is visiting him in New York. And again, this could be the answer as somebody who's just covering up. That's fine. But give me something. Give me something to hang my hat on. Some independent piece of evidence that suggests something was going on. Now, there's a lot redacted and blacked out. Could be something there, but you can't use something that's blacked out. You either got to make them reveal it, or you can't really make assumptions about why it's blacked out. This also, with the 9/11 thing. So, like, the government lied all over the place about 9/11, but the fact they were lying does not prove everybody's conspiracy theory. Okay? Especially, you can't prove, conspiracy theory A and conspiracy theory B if they are both self-contradictory. Okay, there's a lot of reasons the government could have been lying besides it was all planned by Dick Cheney and blah, blah, blah. So, including, covering up for the fact that the FBI were following these guys around for years before 9/11. I mean, that alone is enough to lie quite a bit about what happened. The one that always got me was that finding the wallet on the sidewalk under the Trade Center, like it fell out of the plane. That's how we identified one of the chief hijackers. I mean, come on, right? So we know now that they knew that guy's name for a year or two before it happened, and that they were following him around and knew they were taking flying lessons. So anyway, I haven't combed through the Epstein. I've never been that interested in the Epstein case because, to me, my position has always been, regardless of who was involved with him, the government's not going to get smaller. It's not going to cost less. It's not going to invade our liberty or trample our rights any less if you convicted Bill Gates, Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, everybody else, Elon Musk, everybody you can think of who you might convict, it's not going to change anything politically. You could take all those people down, and it's not going to change the political system we have because it's the one most Americans want. Now, you can blame the way they were educated, whatever it is, but it is the one they'll vote for. They will not vote for anybody, even if 1,000 globalists were put in jail for sexual abuse of minors, nothing would change. Okay. So that's my position. You could disagree with it. I mean, again, you have to start going down this, to me, far-fetched idea that's never going to pan out. Well, first we put all these people in jail, and then what? We elect somebody who is going to phase out Social Security, that's going to end the welfare state, that's going to repeal the New Deal. Who's going to vote for that guy? No, nobody. Doesn't matter that you just convicted 1,000 pedophiles. That person's still not getting elected. Okay, nothing will change until the mindset of the American public changes to be more like it was in 1776 or even in 1884. And it's nowhere near there. So that's why I don't care. Again, I don't want to sound like I don't care about the victims. I just don't care about those victims more than all the other people being sexually abused. Today, somebody got sexually abused, unfortunately. But the only reason that people are obsessing over this is they believe it's going to lead to something that I don't think it's going to lead to. And the other thing I wanted to do is just talk about how some of our modern progressive bullshit language has contributed to Epsteria, as I call it, this whole thing about trafficking. All right, so in my day, I'm getting old enough to say in my day, if you solicited prostitution, you were a John, and she was a whore or a prostitute, and that's it. And, it was called prostitution, the world's oldest profession, turning tricks. But now we have to call it trafficking. Like, even if it's just me hiring a prostitute, I'm trafficking her. And it's almost like the trans pronouns, right? It takes something that's clear and makes it confusing, like calling a singular person they. And I'm not being like flip here. I've actually been reading articles that are about one person, and then halfway through, the writer starts using the word they, and I'm like, well, who did they do it with? Oh, he's referring to the one guy who wants to be called they. Trafficking, okay? Trafficking immediately makes you think, number one, it means that they're going from one place to another. Okay, so the way they use trafficking in law enforcement now, you don't have to go anywhere. You could be sitting in a chair and I walk up to you with $100 and something happens and I've trafficked you. You're still in the chair. Okay, so that already lends confusion to the issue, right? And because even that's trafficking, but what's also trafficking, taking an 8-year-old and handcuffing her to the door handle in the back of a van and driving her over the border to Tijuana and selling her. That's also trafficking. So you could see why it would be important to have two different words and not use the same word for those two different things, right? But they do, because they want to make the more minor offense sound worse than it is. And now all of a sudden, trafficking, Epstein hiring prostitutes, legal age and under, turns into he's running some kind of a business, taking them places. Now, he might have taken some to his island, I don't know. But also it means he's like selling the service to somebody else. And this is where the whole idea of a client list comes from. Now, it's possible that Jeffrey Epstein hooked up some of his rich buddies with some girls, and whether they're underage or not, and maybe some were. He was not running a business for this to sell it to like Bill Gates. Okay. When you take a step back and think that these are both billionaires, how ludicrous that is. Okay. So, I mean, I'm just handling the most ludicrous first. It wasn't like that's how Jeffrey Epstein made money. Okay. I'm willing to say he never charged anybody any money at all to get them an underage girl, ever. It never happened. But some people believe it did, especially casual observers of the story, and they hear trafficking and they don't think too much about it. Okay. All of a sudden he's like selling them. Okay, that didn't happen. Did he provide underage girls to anybody else at all, other than just, you know, soliciting sex from them himself? I don't know. He may have. It's hard to believe. I don't know what the atmosphere at his parties were. I haven't seen any videos. I hear there are videos, and we should be able to see those. You know, you black out the victims if there's like young women there, underage. Like, I don't know if he had sophisticated parties that involved, you know, sex or whatever, or was wild and cocaine and, you know, picture the 80s, right? The mirrors and the lines of coke. I don't know what his thing was like. But in any scenario where they're partying, so to speak, I could see where it'd be like, oh, there's girls around and this guy floats off with one or has sex with her right in the living room, you know, with other people around. Who knows, right? I don't know. But there's no evidence of that so far. And it might be, I'm on both sides of the fence of this. One, being at parties like that, my younger, very younger days, you know, that's the way people behave. And when you got a lot of money, you could behave like that a lot more and feel like the boundaries for you don't exist and all that stuff. I get it. And I've been around very rich people and I understand. I Forrest Gumped myself into some pretty strange places. Someday we'll do a podcast just about that. On the other hand, what I also know about people like that is they are very careful about exposing themselves to risk. Okay. Most of them are that rich because they understand risk very well. And they can get any girl they want on their own. They don't need Epstein to get them whatever woman they want. Even Bill Gates, as goofy as he looks and as nerdy as he sounds, has enough money to do all that himself. He does not need Jeffrey Epstein. So the most likely scenario would be you get people at like a party and maybe there's some drinking or some drugs and people's inhibitions are down and somebody, you know, hooks up, right? You know, again, if you got a bunch of video of his place, produce that video. The prosecutors are saying we couldn't find anything in there to prosecute anybody else. And I've got one foot in both camps there too. On one hand, I know prosecutors want to prosecute even if they think the guy's innocent in a lot of cases. But, you know, they could be covering up. They could be receiving orders, whatever. You know, too many people we don't want to take down in there. There's no way to know, but I tend to believe that with both administrations in possession of these files and the opportunity to hit the other side, if they could get somebody from the other side, for the Democrats to be Republicans, for the Republicans to be Democrats, they would have done it, right? I mean, I guess the argument against that is that there's too many involved on both sides. My gut is telling me there's nothing there. I think my gut is telling me Epstein was involved in all this stuff. He was a worm. He was a climber. He was somebody that intelligence either used or wanted to be involved in that. And he also, like underage girls. He was a degenerate, right? And I think people knew about it. That I'll go that far. I mean, the whole Lolita Express idea came from somebody else. People knew about it and they didn't report him. Now, again, that's a complicated thing. You got business with him, whatever it is, you're flying on his plane, you see a girl. I mean, he didn't have sex with her in front of you. So now you're going to bring a charge against another billionaire who's got resources to defend himself. You better, be ready for the consequences. So, I guess, again, we'll wait and see. Tomorrow, they might release some, video, say they've got the evidence that a jury's going to be able to see that Bill Gates was, in there with 12 Girl Scouts. Who knows? We'll see. We haven't seen any of that so far. And the hysterical part of this is how invested everyone is that there has to be this trafficking thing. Oh, and it's the other thing about language too. So, I mean, the very youngest girl that Epstein was ever accused of abusing was 14. Okay. Which is not right. There's no reason in the world why a 50-year-old man should be having sex with a 14-year-old girl. All right. In modern America, I will say that's a rather modern idea. They married them younger in Western civilization not that long ago. I mean, this is generally the idea that the age of consent would be something like 17 or 18 or even 16 is pretty recent. It's part of the progressive movement. This idea, that these women are being oppressed or abused or whatever, that's all progressive stuff. Right in there with all the rest of it, the patriarchy and all that stuff. So I'm not saying that they're wrong about that, but you should realize what the origin of even the whole idea is, because if you were a duke in the 15th century England, you might be marrying a 12-year-old and nobody thought anything of it. Okay. A lot of times that was for reasons other than love, let's say, either political or familial inheritance, lands, riches, that kind of thing. And I'm not saying just because it's a progressive idea, it's wrong. The thinking behind it is kind of wrong, but it's a little like the civil rights movement, right? I mean, it was led by communists, and their plan was to use racial minorities as a wedge to try and overthrow the capitalist system. That's why, like, all of them were communists, okay? Like Rosa Parks, right? But that doesn't mean there wasn't a problem. Like, they hit on a problem that did need to be solved, right? The whole segregation thing. I'm not saying it was solved the right way, but it certainly couldn't have. Nobody would like to see that's still around, right? And maybe the same thing is true of the age of consent laws, but you should recognize these are progressive ideas that grow out of the whole socialist patriarchy thing. I realize I'm bouncing around here because I think I'm bouncing my camera. So I apologize for that for those watching the video. Did I just solve it? Maybe I did. So the other thing I was going to say was children. So no children were involved. So it's actually the term pedophilia doesn't actually apply to Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. They've got another word for it. I forgot to write it down before I got on the mic here. But pedophilia actually means having, like, well, first of all, pedophilia only exists in your mind. Like, you could be a pedophile without committing the crime. It's acting on it. But pedophilia is the sexual preference for, like, prepubescent children, 8-year-old, 7-year-old, whatever. And to me, that's a mental illness. I think it's still classified as a mental illness, but I think they're trying to normalize it. So, that's on the whole progressive side there. But there's a different word actually, technically, for being attracted to, like, young post-puberty girls or boys or whatever. So that word doesn't apply. And certainly the word children doesn't apply. And the vast majority, it looks like, of Epstein's people were actually much older. I think there were some as young as 14, allegedly. He only pled guilty to one thing, and it didn't specify the age, just that they were under 18, which isn't even illegal in most states. But, the evidence points towards that there were, I think we do have from all these emails that Epstein himself was in some very suspicious circumstances with girls like that were 14. But I think most of them were legal. And then there's a whole bunch of them that were like 16 and 17, which means they'd have been legal in many states, most states. And then there were the ones that were younger than that. So, but none of them were children, but you could see where the story went from soliciting prostitution, including minors under 18, all the way to running a business of selling children to demonic globalists. Okay. I mean, that's a very long way between those two things. And there was no business here. There was no like company and I don't even mean that it wasn't registered. I mean, there was no going concern for Epstein to make money this way at all. No one is even alleging that. Okay. But the way everyone talks about it and the client list, the casual bystander would believe that's what we're talking about. Okay. And so what is the client list if it exists? It's just people that he may have hooked up. And then there's all these theories that he's blackmailing people. And again, there's all this delusional hope that the reason we have the political system we have was because Epstein was blackmailing leaders to make different decisions than they otherwise would. No, that's not why. I mean, I guess that's why, that's my frustration with this hysteria, is that there's so many people invested in an idea along those lines. It might not all be exactly the same, but that somehow this Epstein thing is a major reason why we have the political system we do. And it's not even a minor reason. It's not any reason at all. So, and here's my last thing. I don't know if this is true or not, but I wanted to share this, the whole Dan Bongino thing. So Dave Smith has been just hammering Bongino, and rightly so. I mean, what a dork he is. But I have a theory that when Bongino did the press conference and said there's no there, and everybody just rolled their eyes so hard they almost fell over, that he was telling the truth. And I think, Bongino hyped the whole Jeffrey Epstein trafficking client list as much as anybody, maybe more than anybody else before he got in there. And I think he might have believed it and got in there and found out that there were no clients, that it was just Epstein. It was just, he was a degenerate. He abused young girls, and that's all there was to it. And he was around all these other people, and they were, on his plane and at his apartment for different reasons. And at least as far as evidence goes, there was nothing they could prosecute anyone else for. Now, just remember, go back and rewatch the press conference if you have to. Look at the look on his face. Now, everybody's take is like he looks like that because he's lying and he realizes he's betraying everybody. I think it's possible, I'm not saying this is definitely the case, he looks like that because he can't believe he believed this and it's not true. Or he can't believe he got in there and there actually is no client list. And now he's got to go tell the people that he has whipped into a frenzy that it was all bullshit. And it really wasn't bullshit, that he believed it. It was just all wrong. Like there was no client list. And I think that's very possible. And now he's trying to spin it some way. Hey, who knows what he's even trying to do? He comes out and what does he call everybody who's pissed off about this, that he didn't do anything about the Epstein client list? Doomers. I can't remember if black pillars. And it's his mission now to get rid of the black pillars because, they're going to somehow that Trump being awful again is going to be their fault now, just for having a negative attitude. That's why Trump signed the largest spending bill in history again, after he promised he wouldn't the very first time he did it in 2017. He just did it again for, I don't know, the 10th time. And is attacking everybody who even spoke up a little against it. As usual, not many. Thomas Massey, Rand Paul, the only worthwhile people of the whole 400, 535 in Congress, including the Senate, the only two that I would vote for. But so, yeah, so everything Trump does this time around, when he totally, by the way, he was going to, early in the Doge, he was going to find all this fraud and abuse in the government, and Doge was going to cut all this spending. And I was going along saying, yeah, he'll never say that about defense. And then one day he said, oh, yeah, he's going to go to the Pentagon and the Defense Department, and we're going to find a lot of waste there. There's a lot to cut. I couldn't believe he was even saying it. I mean, I'm kind of grateful that somebody just said it, but it's not a matter that they're inefficient. Their role should be changed. That's why we should cut. But anyway, so he was saying all that, and then he said, no, on second thought, I need to increase defense spending by more than 50%. Biden got it to 900 billion. He wants 1.5 trillion. And I'm sure they'll end up spending that. So, this will all be, somebody else's fault now, right? Oh, if everybody didn't obsess over the Epstein files, he's trying to distance himself. And I will say that, like, if anybody does fall into that category of, like, there was no trafficking the way you and I would use the term, but like hooked up at a party, I got to think Elon Musk, well, first of all, Bill Clinton, obviously. Bill Clinton would have thrown the party, right? And then Elon Musk is high on my list of guys who would be the kind of guys who might do that, right? Even though there's so much risk in getting involved on foreign turf with any woman, even a, 35-year-old woman. And then you got Trump. Trump has got that sleazy kind of edge to him, going into the beauty contest business. Come on. But on the other hand, I mean, Trump is highly litigious and highly lawyered up on everything. I've got a foot in both camps about him. Would he or wouldn't he? So he definitely likes women. I don't know where his line is with age, if he has one. I don't know that he doesn't have one. But, again, when you have that kind of money and you're in someone else's place that has cameras all over the place, or you assume they do, believe me, these people, they are very aware of risk. And that would be a strong motivation not to do what they otherwise might like to do if Epstein gave them the opportunity. So right now we'll see. I'm not, again, I'm not married to the idea that nobody hooked up with a younger girl. Could have happened. I haven't seen any proof of that yet. If they find the proof and prosecute the guy, that's fine. If it's Trump, I don't care. I mean, there's a whole bunch of people who are pushing it back against the Epstein thing just because they're afraid it'll hurt Trump. I couldn't give a rat's ass if it hurts Trump at all. Okay. And I voted for the guy. I've said that before. So if he gets, I'd hate to see him unfairly taken down for this. And then, of course, like bombing countries, in violation of the War Powers Act and all sorts of other things that he's done that every president does, that he won't be impeached for, that he'd never be prosecuted for. I wouldn't want to see him wrongly prosecuted for this, or anybody else for that matter. So we'll see. I'm hoping at some point this is it. Is this going to be it? Will we get past the whole Epstein thing? And the only reason I want to get past it is I want to get everybody who wants the government to be smaller, for us to be freer, for our property to be more secure. I want all those people to get off this, because this is not going to move the ball, not even a half a yard. in that direction. And so I'm hoping the Epstein thing blows over. If they find real evidence somebody did something, throw them in jail. That's good with me. I don't care who it is. And it won't be me, that's for sure. Nobody took me on a private jet and tried to hook me up with anybody, not even the Lolita's grandmother. So that's all for today. I appreciate you listening. And don't forget, if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast. If you're watching on video, share this on social media. I'd appreciate it. Thanks very much.
The War of Ideas has only just begun. Arm yourself with the knowledge you need by heading to TomMullenTalksFreedom.com and subscribing to our email list. And remember, every revolution starts in the minds of the people.